Welcome to our final epoxy inlay tutorial. We've been asked so many times to explain the full process of creating this. Now, if you haven't watched the previous videos, the one pour epoxy that you can see here, or the Aliens Weyland-Yutani one that you can see here, then I would definitely take a look at those because we're not going to be going over any of the processes that was covered in those videos. So without further ado, let's jump into Carveco Maker and take a look. Before we get started in this, word of warning, don't try to do this if you're not familiar with creating vectors and layers, because it can get quite complicated with the amount of vectors. So if you're not comfortable doing that, then don't try to do this. That being said, if you are familiar with it, then it's pretty easy to do as long as you keep everything in order. So here you can see, this is my original image. What I've done, I've put this into a paint program. Let me just open this one up, and I've put some numbering in there. So I'm just going to do this any size. I'm not too bothered about that. So it's opened it up absolutely huge. So I'm just going to leave it at that and OK it. And I'll go to the 2D view, and you can see that just in paint, what I've done is I basically wrote down all of the colours that I can see in this, and I've already planned out how I'm going to do this. So I'm going to do black, then I'm going to do yellow, orange, dark red, and that's all for the background, and then I'm going to start doing the dragon. So I've already taken a look at the colours that I want to do for this, and I can see 15 pours that I need to do. So don't worry about the text that I put on there. I'm not bothered about that. I'm not bothered about the size. All that I need to do is get the vectors for this. So to get the vectors for this, what I would do is go into the bitmap to vector tool and trace this as I normally would. I'm going to set the speckle size to be a little bit larger, let's say 10 pixels. And what I'm going to do is reduce the colours, just so it's a bit more manageable, because there's just too many colours in there. Now, if I were to bring this right the way down, let's say to there, you can see that some of the colours start to blend into each other. So I need to bring these colours back, because I know that I've got 15 colours for definite in there. Now, if I were to bring it down to, let's say, around about there, and apply that, and what I'm going to do, rather than start going down here and linking colours, what I'm going to do is go to bitmap, and I'm going to go to pick colour. And let's just zoom in, and I'm going to pick that colour. And it basically tells me what colour that is on the colour palette. So then what I can do is create vectors. And then I'm going to right click on those, and I'm going to move vectors to new layer. And if I open up here, you can see that I've got vector layer 2. And all of these vectors are on that layer, as you can see. So I'm going to rename that to be 2, and let's call that yellow. Now, if you want to, you can change the colour here. It's entirely up to you. I'm not going to do that. Now, what's important to do is make sure that you turn that off, and then you go back to the default layer. If you don't do that, you'll carry on creating vectors on the yellow layer, and you can sort of get into a bit of a muddle. So let's choose the next colour, which is going to be that colour. Create vectors. And you can see that that's created vectors for lots of different parts, and maybe I don't really want that. So what I'm going to do is go back here. Let's bring that down. And you can see that that's created vectors for all of the inside as well. So I can quickly sort that out by just drawing a box around it. And let's just delete those. And then the same up here. This isn't actually on the background. Just delete those. Right, so that's all for the background. So if I select all of those, I'm going to be editing these again in a moment anyway. And then I'm going to move vectors to new layer. I'm going to call that number 3, and this is going to be called orange. Let's call this orange background. I'll do the same for yellow. Again, go back to the default layer, turn that off. And then we can continue to do that and build up all of the different colours. So select the colour picker, select the colour, and then basically build up your stacks of vectors. So I'm going to speed the video along now, and I'm going to get these vectors. Now I've actually forgotten one of the colours, which is the darker grey colour. So there's actually 16 pours that I need to do. So let's select the darker grey colour, create the vectors, again move those to a new layer, and this is going to be called dark grey. And I also need to do one for the background, which is going to be a black pour. So what I'm going to do is select that white, create vectors, and then to sort this out, what I need to do is drop the contrast slider bar down. And straight away I can see that there's a problem, and the problem is that I have an area here which is connected, and that's because the pixel goes right to the edge. So what I need to do with this is to add a border to it. So what I'm going to do is flip those around, so that's the secondary colour. I'm going to delete the vectors, go to model, and I'm going to add border. And let's just add an inch symmetrically. And then if we come up to the top, you can see that it's added some material there. So if I flip those around again and create the vectors now, you can see that it's not joined. Now all that I need for this is this outline, because that's going to be the black pour. So what I can do is press shift on the keyboard to deselect it, and I'll also deselect this one, and then what I can do is just delete that, and then I can move these to a new layer, and this one is going to be called number 1 and black, because that is my first pour, and I'm going to move this up to the top there. So now what we're going to do is check that this is going to actually work when we pour the epoxy in. And the way that we can do that is by colouring in each of the colours. So what I'm going to do is go along and just double check whether all of the vectors are okay, and then we're going to colour them in. So if I drop the contrast slider bar down, you can see that I've got my black background there, and that looks okay. Let's switch to the yellow background, that looks okay. Orange, that's okay. Dark red, okay. Dark green, it's okay. Mid green, light green, belly. Now on here, it's selected some of the horns at the top here. So if I bring up my slider bar a little bit, I don't want any of those. So what I'm going to do is draw a box around them, and also around here. I'm just going to delete them. I don't want the mouth either. Belly mid-orange, belly yellow. Now I can see that it's picked up a few things here. That one there, let's delete that, and also the eyes, they're going to be a different colour. Let's go to white, and you can see there are a few places where it hasn't picked up the white. You could do that manually if you wanted to, or start joining up these colours, but I'm not going to bother for the time being. What I want to do is get rid of all of the other parts of the white that it's picked up. So Control A just to select everything. So what I'm going to do is just draw a box there to delete those. Let's delete that one, and I want a box around this just to delete those. Moving on to grey, and then light brown. So light brown is going to be these areas on the horns and the mane. So what I'm going to do is delete all of these. Like so. Let's delete these, and I'll leave the mouth there. That looks okay. Dark brown. Now again, I've got some little bits here. Let's delete those. Like so. Looks okay as well. And then luminous yellow. So that's pretty much select everything, and then deselect the eyes. And then finally dark grey. That's okay. Right, let's make this some sort of size. At the moment, it's absolutely huge. It's the size of like an aircraft hangar or something. Let's make this an actual real world size. So what I'm going to do is select all of the vectors and move them off to the side. Now make sure that you grab everything, because if you don't, then you're going to have parts that are not selected and it's just not going to match up. Now what I'm going to do is create a rectangle. Now this rectangle represents the size of whatever your material is, whatever you want to do this. So let's say I want to do this 36 by 36, create, and then I'm going to put that in the center. Now I can crop the model to this size. Now what's going to happen is, first of all, is when I do crop this, because my resolution is just shy of 1000, this resolution is going to be so small it might not even be able to create that size. So let's go to model and then crop. And you can see how it's a little bit larger. It can't actually create that size because it's got so few pixels. So what I'm going to do is, with it all still selected, I'm going to go to model, adjust resolution, and I'm going to basically crank that all the way up so I've got a new resolution, which will be helpful when we're actually machining anyway. Select OK and yes, and then it's got a new resolution. Now with that still selected, I'm going to now trim that off by just cropping, and then it should be almost the correct size. So what I need to do now is, if I zoom in and turn this contrast up, you can see that I've got a section of the image. So I don't want that. So what I'm going to do is right click on the bitmap layer and I'm going to clear that. And it just gives me a blank space. So if I zoom out now and I select all of that, what I'm going to do is go to transform, and I'm going to make the height of this, let's say 35 inches, and then select apply. With that still selected, I'm going to press F9. And that places that in the center. Okay, so we're not far away now. I need to check this out because at the moment I've just got a ton of vectors and I don't know what it's actually doing. I don't know whether they're correct or not. So I'll show you a little technique now that you can do just to check whether this is going to work. So starting off at the top, so you need to work from back to front. I'm going to just right click on that light bulb for the black background. Press Ctrl A. Now you can see that I've made a mistake straight away. I've got a border around here. I don't want that, so let's delete that. So select all. You can do this by right clicking on the vector layer and select all vectors. It's just I'm used to pressing Ctrl A. And then what we're going to do is we need to sort this colour palette out. So it's already got lots of colours in there and I don't want that, so I'm going to create a new bitmap layer. And I'll just call this, let's just call this new, just so I know. And then when I click on that, it just gives me these standard colours like when you open up a job in Carveco Maker. So what I'm going to do is make sure that black is selected as the first colour. So just left click on it and then go to bitmap and I want to flood fill vectors. Basically that colours everything in black. So it's as though I'm pouring black epoxy in here. So I can check whether this is going to work. So let's go to yellow background and I'll select all of the vectors. And I'm going to right click, add colour. Now you may think, oh, you got a yellow there. The reason that I'm doing this is because I want to add them here because I'm going to select them again in a moment. So let's select yellow and then go to bitmap, flood fill vectors, cool.
And then just repeat the process over and over again.
Right, so what we can do now is check this out. So let's turn off the vectors. And let's just zoom in and take a look at it. Okay, so it looks okay. There is some stuff that I can see that's wrong with it. Mainly, I can see the black coming through on certain areas. You can see here, I've got black coming through on most of these background here. Now, if you take a look at the actual picture, you can see that I haven't got black coming around here. But there is a section where I do have some black, so you can see here. And I didn't fix it enough, so you can see that I do have a little bit of black here, and you can see it's sort of showing through. Right, let's fix that. So let's concentrate on the background first of all. And I'll show you a technique where you can sort this out. Now, one of the ways to do this is to create vectors around this, which you already have, and offset these vectors. Now, I don't really want to do that because it starts to get really, really complicated because you have all these vectors all over the place. And yeah, I just don't want to be doing that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually delete all of the vectors that I've got now. The reason being is because I'm going to create new vectors, and it's going to be really easy to create them. So I'm going to edit these colours, and then I'm going to create new vectors. So I'm going to turn all the vectors on, and I'm going to delete them. I'll keep all of these vector layers because I still want to use them. I'm going to go back to the default layer. Right, now a couple of ways that you can do this. First of all, what I find the easiest is to go to bitmap and colour, and then use something called thicken. Now this is really good because it thickens up the actual edge of a colour. So what I'm going to do is select that colour, and then let's select blue as the secondary colour. I'll show you what it does. So if I go to colour and thicken, and I'll just choose 1 pixel, you can see what happens is it creates a blue outline around the edge of that. Now this is useful for other things. Let's say that you've got an area where vectors basically using the same line. You could just use this to create a border around it. So let's undo that, and I'll show you what it does if I set that to be quite large. So if I set that to be 10 pixels, you can see it colours around the edge. Now I don't want that, obviously. What I want to do is do this yellow colour in the same colour. So what I need to do is use the yellow as a secondary colour as well. So if I go to colour, thicken, let's say 10 pixels, it will make that larger by 10 pixels. Obviously that looks a complete mess. So let's go to thicken again, but I'm going to do this 1 pixel. Now you can't have this lower than 1 pixel. Ideally I would want to do this, let's say half a pixel, but if I try to do that, it tells me that it needs to be between 1 and 100. So the lowest that I can go on this is 1. So select OK, and then you can see that it's thickened it up. Now that looks okay. I'm not too bothered about these because what I'm going to do is when I create the vectors, I'm going to increase the speckle size so it doesn't pick these little row pixels up. And to be quite honest, when I machine it, it probably won't show up anyway. Now this one will. So what I'm going to do with this, I could try to thicken this up, or I could create the vectors and then start editing the vectors. But a much easier way is to just select the paint tool, make sure that you set that down, and I'm just literally going to paint this back in. Now, no one knows what that's supposed to look like, so you can just do this locally. And then keep thickening and painting each colour as needed. So that looks okay. Now, you could go around doing this on the underside of the dragon. Personally, I quite like how this has got the black around the edges. I wish that I would have had this in the actual final piece. Now it's entirely up to you if you were to do this on this. This is what it would look like. So if I choose, I think it's, let's do the middle one. So this middle colour here. So if I go to thicken, it'll make it larger like so. Now, it's entirely up to you if you want to do that. I'm not going to do that for this example. I'm going to leave it like this. Now, another thing that you could do is when you actually machine, let's say this middle yellow one, you could actually machine that a little bit deeper. So just set your Z on the CNC just a little bit lower, and then it would cut down a little bit deeper, and you wouldn't get these black lines anyway. So let's say, for example, I've actually edited all of these. I didn't really need to delete all of these, but I'll show you how to quickly get them back. So let's go to bitmap to vector, and speckle size, I'm going to set that quite high compared to the default. The default is 2, so I'm setting that to 10. So it's not going to create any vectors around anything that's less than 10 pixels. I'm not going to reduce the colours or anything. Let's go to the black background, which is actually the white, and I'm going to create vectors. Then what I'm going to do is do what we've done before, deselect that, and then delete everything else.
And then, as before, repeat the process on each layer.
Okay, so what you can do now is test this out again if you want to, which is like you can basically do the same thing. So bitmap, fill, all of the vectors again if you want to. I'm not going to do that because it should be exactly the same as what's on the screen. Now I've also got all of my vectors now which I can use for machining. So I don't need to show this picture. So what I'm going to do is go to the 3D view, and I'm going to go back to my material. So now I can start machining these in order. Now if you've seen the other epoxy videos, It's pretty much exactly the same thing. So I'm just going to do the first few and then sort of speed up the video because it's just basically the same process over and again. So we've got black background. So let's turn that on. You can see I've got the black background. So let's go to Toolpaths. I'm going to do a V-bit carving toolpath. First of all, let's limit this to a maximum depth of 0.15. Now you could go a little bit deeper with this one because this is actually sort of the base for everything else. The only problem with that is that I'm filling this in with black epoxy and it's going to take quite a bit of epoxy to fill this in. So it's up to you. I'm just going to do it 0.15 and then go shallower with the rest of the toolpaths. So select a carving tool. So I'm going to carve with the 60-degree V-bit. And I'm going to select the vectors. Actually, I'm not going to select the vectors. I'm going to select a layer because I've got all of these on layers. It makes no sense in me selecting vectors. So select the black background, refresh. Now this actually wants to go down 24 inches, so it's almost going to go halfway to the ground if I let this go. So I need to make sure that I set the maximum depth. Roughing tool. Let's use my 1/4-inch Jenny to rough this out, and then let's leave an allowance. Let's say 10 thou. Set up my home. Let's say 0.2, and my slave said 0.2. Define material. Now this doesn't really matter, to be honest. I think the material that I used was probably about 2 inches. It doesn't really matter because everything's coming from the top and it's all 2D toolpaths anyway, so you're telling it how far to go down. I'm not cutting this out, so let's just say 2 inches. Make sure that it's at the top. So okay, and then let's calculate this. So let's open up the V-bit carving. I'm going to close the vector layers just so I can see the toolpaths a bit better. So I've got the V-bit. Let's turn these off. Turn that off. You can see it's going around there. Now what's happening here is that I've got quite a large step over. So if I simulate, let's say the roughing, okay, that's all good. Let's simulate the finishing. Now make sure that if you have got bits sticking up here, that you take a look at your step over. So let's say that I was to change this to, let's say 10 thou, and calculate it, and then basically it makes it smaller. So let's say I were to do this 1 thou. You can see how tight it is together. Obviously this adds to machining time, but it will stop you having ridges where the V-bit steps over. So let's set it to, let's say 10 thou. And let's delete the simulation. Now what I'm going to do is rename these as well. So let's call this 1 black, just so I know when I save them. So what I'm doing with this is doing the toolpaths and then sending them to the machine to cut. So I'm doing one toolpath at a time. Now I've just zoomed out and I've noticed a problem because I can see these lines. Now what's happened here is, remember back when I cropped this, what I've done, I've cropped it, but it's still kept the original 0 from that huge model. So what I need to do is go to model, set position, and you can see that it's actually 467 inches offset. So I probably won't be able to machine this. So let's turn that back to 0, 0, and okay. Now what's happened is the toolpath is still in the same place, but I've actually moved my 0. So what I need to do is right click and then calculate. And then that will move it back down. That looks a bit better. So I'm at the bottom left, and you can see that it's coming here. Now, if I want to, I would probably do this in the middle, to be honest with you, because I wouldn't want it to come off the block. I'd need to measure this perfectly. So let's set this up to be center pixel. And then I'm going to recalculate that. Okay, so that's now in the center. Okay, so that's all good. So what I'm going to do is send this to the machine and let's get machining. So this black epoxy to fill this in,
I'll be honest, I only thought that this was going to take 2 cups and it took absolutely loads, and I needed to make sure that it was above the surface, and also bearing in mind that the epoxy will shrink. When I eventually filled it up, gave it a blast with the blowtorch just to get rid of all the air bubbles.
Right, so the next one, let's go to Toolpaths. I'm actually going to copy this. So a lot of this is just duplicating that first toolpath. So if I go to duplicate, and I'm going to call this 2, and I think that this is yellow background. Yep, yellow background. Let's call that black background. Okay, so let's double click on that, and then let's limit this tool to a maximum depth also, but I don't want it to be exactly the same depth as this. The reason being is if I cut through this black epoxy that I've just poured, then what I would need to do is seal the wood underneath it again, because the epoxy will go through the wood. So let's set that to 0.14. So I just want a layer on the bottom. So exactly the same parameters, except I'm going to change it to yellow background and then calculate. Now, if I turn off all of these toolpaths, let's turn on that one. Now, to be honest, I don't really need to use the Jenny for that. I'm a bit lazy sometimes where I can be doing other things while, even though it will take a little bit longer just using the V-bit, I can be doing other things whilst that's actually machining. So what I'm going to do is remove that Jenny. And I'm going to just change the step over those, let's say to 20 thou, or 0.5 millimeter. Okay, so that looks okay. Let's just delete that, and let's turn the vectors back on. We'll create a duplicate for this. Now I'm going to speed this video up now because I'm basically just doing duplicates of all of these for each of the vectors. So just carry on doing exactly the same thing.
So with all of the toolpaths calculated, I'm going to send each one in turn to the machine, get it machined, pour the epoxy in, wait 24 hours or so, and then machine the next part. Now, one thing that you need to watch out for when you're doing this, I kept on adding epoxy and just kept on adding onto the top and onto the top. And eventually you're going to add quite a bit onto the original background. As you can see here, the yellow and the orange is sticking forward. You'll see in a moment a huge piece sticking up. Now the software doesn't know that this is sticking up because you're setting your 0 at the base of the wood. So I started setting my plunge a lot slower so it went in there because it was taking quite a large cut. Now I've also cut 2 of these at a time. That's the reason for the masking tape. I've done 1 pour and then made sure that it didn't go over the next pour with the masking tape, and then gone on to the next one. The epoxy that I'm using is West Systems again, and I'm using the Divine Pigments and also the Alumilite pigments for this job. So here you can see a few of the layers on top of each other, and you can see that the V-bit is going right the way down there and it's taking off quite a large cut. For this, I had to lower the plunge rate and also have smaller step downs so that first cut wasn't as harsh. What I would suggest you do is skim the top off after a few pours, so then you don't have this problem. Right, so the moment of truth. I'm going to skim the top of this off. Hopefully it works, fingers crossed. It worked! I know I sound surprised. One thing that I'm not happy with though, if you take a look on the original image, you can see there's a darker green colour. Now I noticed this when I was pouring it and I thought that it looked a bit too dark. So for instance, if you take a look at the hand here, there's hardly any black in there. If you take a look at the hand on here, you can see I've got this large portion that is black, and that's supposed to be a darker green. So not to worry. What I'm going to do, because I've still got my 0 set, is I'm going to go back and I'm going to recut that darker green and then fill it in again, skim the top off again. So we've left this for a day or so, and I'm back now and I'm ready to skim off the top. Now, one thing that I did notice that I don't really have to mention, but I'm going to, is when I surfaced this before, I think that I was being a bit too aggressive with it. And as you can see here, going across the epoxy are basically what originally I thought were bubbles, because I had this in a previous example, but they were all in a line, and it was really confusing me why I had all these air bubbles in a line. I thought nothing of it. When I was doing this, it happened quite a few times, and it happened to be in line with the tool. So I think what's happening is that the skimming tool, because I'm taking so much off, it was about, I think it was about 0.2 of an inch of a cut, or 5mm. It was going across there, and it seems to be sort of like chipping the epoxy as it goes across, and it's creating these little holes in the epoxy. They're only small, but you can make them out. So I'm going to do something a little bit different with this, because I just want to see whether it's a better finish. So I'm going to set this up, and I'm going to do this in 2 cuts, and I'm only going to go down about 40 thou or a millimetre at a time, and I'm going to go down 2mm until I touch this surface. So I'm going to change the tool to the skimming tool, and then I'm going to set this up. So in Carveco, you can see that the finished depth of the original skim that we were doing was 0.1mm or 4 thou. I'm going to change that so it comes down to 2mm or 80 thou. So let me click on that, change that to 2mm. And then what I'm going to do on the surfacing bit tool, I'm going to change the step down to be 1mm or 40 thou. And I'm going to calculate that, and I'm going to save that out, and I'll call that skim new, and then click save. Let's load that up, skim new. And this should do 2 cuts now. To set up the tool, what I'm going to do is just move over to an area that we've already machined. Let's say about there, and then let's bring that down. So that's just touching on the top of there. Now I can set my Z0 here. So let's set that as 0. Click set, and you can see that it's 0. Now what I need to do is I need to back this off by 2mm. The reason being, if I don't, it's going to machine into this by 2mm. So let's go up 2mm and then reset the 0. Now the reason that I'm doing that is because I want it to do 2 cuts that are above the 0, and that's the only way that I can really do it, by fooling the machine as to where the Z0 is. So this is ready to machine now. So I've taken it off the machine, and as you can see in the middle, it's sort of the right height, but I still need to take a bit more off on both of the ends. I'm going to sand this down anyway, so it looks a lot nicer. So finally, we're finished. It's taken me quite a while to actually do this, as I said. You need to have a lot of patience and a lot of time to do it. But as you can see, it's really, really worth the effort. The piece looks absolutely fantastic. There are some things that I'm not happy with. Certain areas, some of the epoxy has actually bled into the grain. But because the piece is so large, you don't really notice it too much, and I'm not going to really worry about it. So I hope that you found these tutorials useful for doing epoxy inlays. Please let us know what you think, and hopefully we'll see you on the next one. Take care. Goodbye.